So, in response to this question, I'd like to say two main things. I'd like to start where Pope Leo started. Just after his election as Pope, he goes out onto the balcony in front of St. Peter's, and the first thing he says to everyone, as the successor of St. Peter, is, "Peace be to you all." Of course, he's not using his own words there. He's quoting from the Gospel of John and what Jesus says to the disciples on the evening of the first Easter Sunday. And this is crucial because in the Christian tradition, peace, which is not of this world, as Christ tells us, is primarily the result of salvation. It's about reconciliation with God. And so the early Christians understood peace as their reconciled relationship with God, as being children of God. But then, of course, that has consequences for the way we live in the world. Of course, as Jesus himself told us, we should love each other as we love ourselves. That's Matthew 22:39. And even more, we should love our enemy, which is Matthew chapter 5, 44 to 46. So we could say this is the kind of moral reflection or the sort of moral consequence of this peaceful relationship that we've received from God. And so when Christianity becomes the dominant religion in the West, you begin to get this idea that peace should be the normal state of things because God has reconciled us with himself. Even though there was so much war, there were so many conflicts, there was so much tension, there's this idea in the background that really the real thing, the thing we could imagine we could arrive at, is peace, because that's given by God. And so in that context, in those early centuries, the papacy emerges as a kind of key peacemaker. Many, many conflicts were resolved by the Holy See. And we could even say that the Holy See becomes the first ever international peace-building organization, you know, centuries before we had the League of Nations or United Nations or anything like that. But of course, in between, we have the Reformation. And when the Reformation comes along, that breaks the unity of Christianity, and many players no longer recognize the authority of the Pope. So we lose this international peacemaking body at that time. Furthermore, what happens with the interpretation of the scriptures is that it tends to shift from the dominant position being the New Testament and the figure of Christ, the bringer of peace, more to the Old Testament, because people are looking for the image of the people of God because they want to strengthen their nations, the nation states. And they start to use more the Old Testament, in which, of course, violence is much more present. So we see a shift in the use of the scriptures in understanding the way we should be living in the world. But still, nevertheless, the papacy keeps a special role. And I'd just like to quote from this book, a text that's written in the 18th century about the papacy as a peacemaker. The text is this: "The interest of the human race requires a power to restrain sovereigns and to watch over the life of nations. That restraining power of religion could be, by general consent, placed in the hands of the popes, who, reminding kings and people of their duties and condemning their crimes, would be regarded as images of God on earth." So that's written in the 18th century, and I think you'll be quite surprised to know that it's actually written by Voltaire, that text. Voltaire, who was massively anti-Catholic, did all that he could to undermine the Catholic Church. Yet even Voltaire could see at that point that the papacy had played this very, very important role in peace building. So the end of my first point is, we're in a situation now in the world where the multilateral system is becoming weaker and weaker. We can see the UN can't do its usual role or its expected role of bringing about peace. And I think this brings the papacy and those words that Pope Leo used at the beginning of his pontificate much more to the fore. And I think we will see the Holy See being quite involved in promoting peace in this quite complicated, turbulent world that we're in. The second thing I'd like to say comes from a statement that Pope Leo made during the Jubilee of Governments. He gave a talk, June the 21st, to the Interparliamentary Union, and he made three main points with these parliamentarians who were there. And the second point, which was the longest one, was to say we need, in this difficult situation that we're in, something that we all share, and that could be natural law. He was trying to call people back to using the natural law again. And that's very, very interesting, because if we look at Catholic social teaching, the main text in the history of Catholic social teaching on peace is Pacem in Terris. And I think the key word in Pacem in Terris is the word order. Order. The Pope, John the 23rd, who wrote it in the early 1960s, has these 6 levels of order that keep peace in the world. There's order in the universe, he says. There should be order inside ourselves, although this is damaged by sin, and he talks about this. We need order between human beings. Then the 4th level of order is order between each member of the political community and the political authority. Then the 5th level is between political communities. And then the final level, the 6th level, is at the world community, the whole community of humanity. And the order comes from what God implanted in our beings, in our nature, in creating us. And that brings us back to the natural law.